Okay, I think that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the new left, this anti-Stalinist left, had to become somewhat more critical towards what can be called minority nationalisms. In that sense, it doesn't mean that we support great Russian chauvinism or imperialist approach, but at this stage, there is a growing suspicion about kind of minority nationalist projects as basically representing very much the same kind of policy as the big empire, but in a kind of miniature format, you know. So, and in that sense, what we tend to say now, of course, there are different currents, and here there are disagreements also among ourselves. But for example, if I'm speaking for X or for the journal Left Politics, which we published, our position is that we have to consider the class nature of these movements and how democratic are these movements inside themselves, and how democratic is their project. So we have, before supporting these movements, we have to consider what is their social base, what are their politics, and only then we think whether we are going to be supportive or critical or negative of these movements. That's one thing. And second, speaking about Chechnya, for example, there were always Chechen groups which we worked with, which were kind of progressive, but they were very marginal, actually. And ironically, the interesting thing was that they were not necessarily so marginal in the society, but they were very marginal in politics. So these people who said that they didn't like the way Russia, the way Moscow ruled Chechnya, but they were not happy with Islamists. They were not happy with nationalists either. They were not happy with Maskhadov type nationalists who wanted some kind of nationalist, not very democratic and not very pluralistic society to be established in Chechnya. And but what happened to this third position, this so-called anti-war Chechen anti-war Congress? It was actually pretty big in terms of numbers, but it was completely destroyed by the pressures from both sides. And by now, I think one of its leaders, Shakhmurzaev, is in London. Another guy dropped out of politics, Maigov. So, but honestly, we have no reason to support the current regime in Chechnya, which is formed by the very same old mujahideen who turned sides and now became pro-Russian. Neither we have many reasons to be happy about Islamic fundamentalist groups. So in that sense, this is a tough question, of course, but again, I have to examine the situation in a precise way. Racism is on the rise. And if we see the dark side of the picture, this is exactly it. Every week we have at least one killing of a guest worker, of an ethnic, of a foreign ethnic worker, and sometimes of Russians. Russian citizens, Russians quote unquote, who belong to ethnic minorities. Like recently, a Kalmyk woman was killed. Supposedly she was confused for a Vietnamese or Chinese, because racially she looked very much the same. But anyhow, they killed a Russian citizen. But usually they kill Kyrgyz, Tajiks. Sometimes they attack Armenians, Georgians. So there are fascist groups which are now quite active in actually killing people. And what was happening was that there was a feeling of unease in the society about it, but no major protest for months after that was going on, till these Nazis killed a Russian guy who belonged to an anti-fascist group. He was a pure, ethnic, blonde, blue-eyed Russian, Aryan Russian. And he was killed by a fascist attack. And immediately the next day there were huge protests. All of a sudden there were spontaneous anti-fascist demonstrations, which were joined by people spontaneously. That also shows that there was a potential for an anti-fascist protest, just there was something missing, and that something was a murder of an ethnic Russian by the fascists. You know?
And mafia? Anything to do with?
With what?
With racism?
Not necessarily. No, these are skinheads, really classical neo-Nazis. You know? But anyhow, there is now a growing anti-fascist movement, and there are clashes in the streets. And now what's happening is that now when there are fascists rallying, sometimes there are anti-fascist attacks on them. You know, which I find a positive thing, especially after they killed so many people. And so they have to be pressed actually. And interestingly enough, when we had these anti-fascist demonstrations, which were spontaneous ones, they were against the law, because Russian law actually makes it very, very hard to demonstrate. You have to ask for 10 days in advance, agree the route with the local authorities. They can move you from one place to another, saying you're not allowed to demonstrate here, you must demonstrate there, somewhere like 10 miles away from the center of the city, so on and so on. And then suddenly there were crowds of people gathering the very same night, and the police didn't intervene. Partly because there was a moral pressure. They just could not afford being seen as supporting the fascists. So there are some positive things happening.